I hear a lot of people talking about budgeting or talking about saving for a specific big purchase. But the narrative that I most commonly hear is just how to save a little money on this one thing or how to get a good deal in this one situation. And I guess I really believe the saying that your calendar and your spending show what you really value. And I think for me, FF1 was taking a really hard look in the mirror at that, at what am I saying I want my values to be? What is my calendar and my spending saying they are now? And how do I change my behaviors and systems to make sort of time and money choices that match these values that I claim to prioritize? So I think just, bringing my day-to-day reality into alignment with what I'm saying that I want.
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you are meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here.
My name is Rachel, and this is the School of Financial Freedom podcast.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about systems, attitudes, and behaviors, and the pyramid of failure. I find this to be a really important lesson because, people who take Financial Freedom 1 and, the people who finish it, it's super exciting, right? Like you get this idea of what you want to do with your life, you make a plan for it, but all of this is idle chatter until you actually enact a system and a plan to do it. And even after the plan, you still have to go into it and actually live your life as such. And so excited for you to meet Rachel today. Rachel is, again, I've talked about it with other guests, is sort of my ideal student. She took the course at the ideal age, mid-20s, where she was the beginning of her career. So she could take advantage of the miracle of compound interest. She could plan around the idea of organizing her adult life around this. It becomes harder in your 50s. So I really love teaching people in their 20s. Rachel also is a special person because Rachel is the person who convinced me to do podcasting. And it took her years to do it. She kept on saying how easy it was and like how fun it was. And I simply did not believe her. And I finally took the dive, and I'm super grateful. So it has been fun and has been easy. So Rachel, thank you. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm so glad you finally jumped off the podcasting cliff. It's great. Great to see this show take form. My name is Rachel. I'm originally from Boulder, Colorado. I currently live in Los Angeles with my partner, and I work at a startup where I lead data and operations. I'm a very analytical, data-driven type of person, which I think definitely drew me to learning more about personal finance in my own life. But outside of work, I love the outdoors, hiking, biking. I love to read science fiction. And the two newest hobbies I've taken up lately are beach volleyball and stand-up comedy.
Beach volleyball and stand-up comedy? Oh, gosh. We're going to have to talk about that.
Just trying to embrace the Los Angeles lifestyle,
They seem very, very different.
Both pretty stereotypical for this region, I would say.
West LA specifically.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's start off with what year did you take Financial Freedom? How old were you?
So I took Financial Freedom starting in July of 2020. And so I was 26 years old.
Okay. All right, 2020. And we met in a fellowship called Starting Block, right?
Yes, the year prior. Yep.
And what piqued your interest to actually take Financial Freedom?
Yeah, this is funny. I remember the conference where you did a session on, I forget what it was called. Maybe it was called Financial Freedom or Personal Finance or something. And I remember expecting the session was going to talk about maybe budgeting or salary negotiation. And instead you started by having everyone write down what is wealth. or like meaning what does it mean to you to be wealthy? And that was just a really striking way to start, a session on this topic, I thought. And so that got just the fact that to see you coming from kind of this different mindset, whereas I was thinking about my Excel spreadsheet budget and you were talking about kind of like, what is the vision or what is the why behind, thinking about how you spend your money and your time. That was really, really interesting to me. So that's what piqued my interest originally in that session that you did at Starting Block. And that's why I was interested in kind of diving in more.
Okay, so what did you learn? What was your huge takeaway from financial freedom?
I think my biggest takeaway from financial freedom was thinking about this concept of retirement as less of this mythical thing you do in your 60s and more of like a sort of life event that you can plan for at various kind of lifestyle levels and income levels. And so it made me feel like there were a lot more choices or like different ways I could think about it beyond just the, start your job after college and then, work for, 40 years. Having the freedom to think about that in different ways beyond that kind of norm or stereotype was, I think, really, really a paradigm shift for me.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest keys in the financial independence movement, the idea that time wealth is more important than monetary wealth, right? And so, if you can do, there's this assumption that you'll retire at age 65, but basically that assumes that you're gonna spend up to your income, and there's just no reason to spend up to your income. If you are thoughtful and you're intentional, what you can do is you can actually buy time out of capitalism. And I feel like that goes to the idea of what wealth is. And I'm just curious, do you remember what you thought wealth was?
Yeah, I actually looked up the notes that I sort of jotted down. But yeah, I mean, it was spending time with my family. It was spending time outdoors, which is something that I love. It was being able to volunteer for things I care about or work on projects that I care about, work on creative projects. It was very little, it was certainly material like stability and comfort, but it wasn't, extravagant material living. It was just it was a lot more about time, especially with people that I love.
Yeah. And beach volleyball and stand-up comedy don't take a ton of income, right?
No, they don't.
So let's talk about lesson 3.4. Tell me about why you chose lesson 3. What it is and why you chose this lesson.
Yeah, as I said before, I work in the data field. I'm a big kind of believer in data and systems. And so this lesson is all about thinking about your beliefs and how those translate to systems and how those translate to your day-to-day actions. So I thought this lesson was interesting, and I picked it because the beginning part of the Financial Freedom 1 curriculum talks a lot about setting up your vision or thinking critically about capitalism or thinking critically about these mindsets that you've been given about money, up to this point in your life. And then in the later part of the curriculum, so sort of around this lesson and the rest of it is a bit more focused on tactically, what do you need to do to bring sort of your day-to-day life and your spending patterns and all of that into alignment with these things that you've said are important to you or this vision of wealth that you've sort of stated. Like we were just talking about, right? The wealth in that sense, rather than just a number in your bank account or your investment accounts. And so I thought this was really interesting because this was actually sort of like rubber hitting the road. This lesson was all about kind of how do you think about what you need to set up in your life to make this into a reality, all these things that you're thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the first parts of the course are either aspirational or they're theoretical, right? They're about capitalism. They're about what you really want in life. But you have chosen a course where you take these ideas and New Age West LA terms, you're going to manifest, or like in Christian terms, you're going to incarnate. But the whole thing is how do you make it real? Because all of this is idle chatter until you decide you're going to actually do this. And that's where the hard work happens. And quite frankly, the hard work is where the transformation happens anyway.
Yep, completely agree.
So tell what's in the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of about, first of all, taking an inventory of what is your vision, what are your current attitudes towards your money, your spending, your prioritization of how you're spending your money, and what are your current behaviors, and which of those behaviors, which of those like good financial habits do you already have? Which sort of habits do you still need to build? Which systems do you still need to build to sort of close that gap between where you are now and where you want to be?
Yeah, so I love one of the biggest ideas in this lesson is the idea of systems versus goals. Can you talk about systems versus goals?
Yes, I love systems. I think there's a James Clear quote that I think was maybe already referenced in another episode of this, but it ties so closely to financial freedom that you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. And so this lesson for me was really about thinking about, okay, what am I already doing well? In my case, that was saving and paying down student loans that I had. So those were things I was already doing well, but I didn't have a good system for investing, for example. I didn't have an account set up. I didn't have sort of an auto deposit set up. I didn't have these things kind of in place. It was something that I had been sort of like thinking about or like researching or like waiting for a good time until I had time to like figure it out. And at some point that's kind of all BS. And I just need to like start doing it and like, you can figure it out or tweak as you go. And so that was the biggest system that this lesson kind of helped me set up.
So let's stop right there because I think it's super interesting because I have this problem in my life and I have my own solutions. But there are a lot of people who have the intent to set up a system, but never get to actually setting it up. Do you have any tips and tools for how do you actually set up a system? Like, how do you actually go from, I need to, create an investment account? Well, you're moving from, I need to invest to actually like, okay, moving to the next intellectual step was I need to set up an account to actually doing it. Like, do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I struggle with as well. I think 2 tips I would say. One is just having some accountability or someone that you've told that you're going to do it who might then ask you if you have done it. So just taking the financial freedom course. And, I posted in our, course discussion group that I was going to do this and I was going to stop thinking about it and finally do it. And so whether or not anyone else in the course actually read that discussion post or even cared, I felt like I had told people and I felt like people were going to notice if I didn't do it. So I think that was one really big sort of accountability mechanism. And I think the other strategy that I use when I run into this in my life is sort of the like eat the frog kind of model, or like if there's one, I don't know if you've heard that saying, but just if there's like one thing on your to-do list that you find yourself really avoiding or you keep procrastinating on, what you should really do is just sit down and do that one thing at the expense of everything else. Just get it done. And then that, like, for me, that gives me a lot of motivation to just like, okay, I'm going to knock this out. I can't do anything else until I knock this out. That gives me a lot of motivation to keep going down my list.
Yeah, that's like the getting things done system, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Actually, on my system, and I'll just show you, we're both on video here. Like, I just have a sheet of paper, and I just write the things I need to get done, and I cross off the things that I get done. And I don't know why, but it's incredibly motivating. Anything that gets onto this piece of paper gets done.
That's amazing.
It's down on the piece of paper. If they don't get on the list, they don't get done.
The paper thing can be a little bit dangerous for me because when I start making the list, I sometimes will start making a list of everything that I could do or like everything that possibly I could think of that I could do like in my life. And then the thing will be like 50 items long and not just like the important like 3 things I need to do this week. So I have to be careful with the making a written list thing, or otherwise it gets scary.
In the lesson, they talk about the difference of Scott Adams, who is the creator of Dilbert, talks about the difference between systems and goals. Like a system is something you do every day, and a goal is just an intention, right? So like, I don't know, like getting more physically fit is a goal, but actually running every day is the system, right? Like you have to, and most people are focused on goals, and it's like, no, actually just create the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, the system was setting up like figuring out what sort of amount I wanted to be investing monthly, and then setting up just an auto deposit from my checking account or whatever to my investment account. That's the system. Once that's set up, it's unlikely that I'll go in and like edit it. If it's set to just auto renew every month, that's the system that gets me to the goal of, where I want to go with financial freedom.
And that's the thing, like everyone thinks personal finance is hard, right? Like, oh, how am I going to like have the discipline or, keep on saving month to month? But like if you have a system and as you're saying, automate it, it just happens without you even knowing it.
It's interesting that you use the word discipline. I heard something last week, I think on another podcast that I really liked, which was discipline is less about sort of like punishment or scarcity and more about keeping a promise to your past self. And I really liked that as a framing of discipline. Like, your past self decided that you want, this goal or you're going to stick with this system or whatever. And so when you're sitting there like, oh, should I be disciplined or should I skip the thing I said I was going to do? It's like keeping a promise to the previous version of yourself that set that up. And I kind of liked that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think, on some level, I think it's even less about like, I don't know, deciding to do things as a matter of identity. Like when you're just like, I'm the person who like saves for the future. Look, a cat. Yeah, I'm someone who saves for the future. And then you just do the thing that comports with your identity. Yeah, in the lesson there's this quote about like, people think that weightlifting is hard, right? But weightlifting isn't hard if you actually lift weights. Like, or people think that they're bad at investing, right? But the thing is, they've just never done it, right? Like, it's like this possible goal of 25x never be reachable, but it's never reachable because you haven't automated your savings. Like, once you automate your savings, it actually becomes pretty easy. You're just letting time do its work.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the speed, right? Your system will like first get you to 1x and then 2x. And yeah, it's going to take you a while to get to 25, depending on all the other variables you've decided. But 2x is a lot closer to 25x than 0 is. So,
well, and the amazing thing about the miracle of compound interest is the time it takes you to get from 1x to 2x is the same time it takes you to get from 2x to 4x or 4x to 8x. So the beginning is always the hardest and because you actually see the least amount of change in the beginning. Talk about the pyramid of failure.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is the part that was a little different from the lesson now versus when I took it. But my understanding is that this is sort of the relationship between the vision versus your strategy versus your actual behaviors. And so which of those parts are you most likely to kind of fall apart in? And I think for me, like the day-to-day kind of tactical, choices that you're making or behaviors that you're doing are the places where you're most likely to fail or where I'm most likely to fail. Maybe that's sort of a human tendency. And so that's where the system comes in, right? Like if I can be pretty constant on this vision of, yeah, I don't want to work until I'm 65. Like that's pretty, like, I think at this point, sort of core to who I am. But this day to day, like, oh, like what should I spend this $100 on? Or should I like make this splurge purchase or whatever, depending on whether I'm tired or stressed or hungry or whatever at that moment, like who knows if I'm going to make a decision that feels most in alignment. So that's where having the system of like, oh, well, I've already automated my investment. So I know that's already taken care of. That priority is already there. So whatever's left over, like, yeah, I can spend it on, this meal or this clothing or whatever, because I know that I've already sort of taken care of my top priorities.
It's interesting, because that connects to what you're saying before about discipline and systems. Like the system actually just creates guardrails to prevent behavior that does not reach your long-term, that does not help you with your long-term goals. Like, yeah, it reminds me of something that we talk about later with the budgeting, and the budgeting is its own system of profit first, right? You actually automate all your savings before you pay anyone else. And so like, it goes into your 401k or it goes into your investment account even before you pay rent, and you don't even see it. And right, like then you actually pay everything else after you've paid your future self. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that ties into this kind of idea that I think is closely, I forget if it was exactly talked about in Financial Freedom, but I think it was close. Some of the other authors and things that you had recommended in that course talk about it, which is this idea of decision fatigue, which I thought was a really interesting concept of if I'm spending a lot of my mental energy and time on decisions with very small financial impact, then I don't have energy left over for these much bigger financial decisions, like whether or not to invest, for example. And so I think systems remove some of the decisions. Like you don't have to decide, you don't have to look at your whole paycheck every month and say, all right, how much of this am I going to invest, or am I going to invest or save or whatever? Like your past you already made that decision and already put it into action. So you're removing that decision. You're removing that like opportunity for you to not follow along with what you want to do.
It's interesting because I think there are analogies. We always talk about money equaling time, but there, in the efficiency world, there's this idea that work will expand to the time allotted to it. And I think time or money is the same way, right? Like the vast majority of Americans, their spending will expand to how much you allot to your budget. That's functionally the hedonic treadmill, right? Like once you start making twice as much of money as before, the vast majority of people, unless they have a system, will just spend twice as much money as they'll have before.
Yeah, without thinking about it, right? Or I think now that I've been through financial freedom, and then when I do experience like increases in income, which has happened a few times since I took the class, like now I can think about like, okay, yeah, you know what? I am going to rent a slightly more expensive apartment now, but I'm still not going to be spending my full income level, right? So I can make intentional choices that, I still want to save at this level, or I want to save more now, but I'm thinking about it with this sort of like critical lens that I don't think I had before.
Can you talk about a specific instance where you got a raise and the decision making you had between allotting it to savings or increasing your savings rate versus increasing your spending?
Yeah. I think kind of right this exact moment in my life is a good example. We're about to move into a new apartment in a couple of weeks. And it's an apartment that's, I would say, a solid step more expensive than the one that we're living in now. But I also make more money now than I did when we moved into this apartment. I've had like a decent jump in my income in that time. And yeah, I'm kind of saving at my goal rate right now. And I have this additional income. And in my current apartment, I don't have a great space to host and have friends and, host things like dinner parties or movie nights or host friends from out of town, that kind of thing. That's really important to me. I've really been missing that the last several years. And so, yeah, I was like, I have some more income. I'm investing at a rate that I feel good about. And I want to spend this kind of extra on a nicer apartment. That's sort of an intentional choice that I made.
One question and one thought. First of all, have you increased your savings rate?
A little bit. Yeah. Let's see. I've increased my like investment rate a little bit. Yeah. So investment savings together. Yeah.
Sure. Has that decreased the amount of years you have until financial freedom?
It decreased it by 2 years. Yeah.
Amazing. So how many more years you got to go?
I have a few different versions of this plan, but like 15.
Okay.
At the moment. Yeah.
You will basically hit FI at the same time I did in my early mid 40s. Amazing. And the key is like, as you keep on getting more raises, I assume that, you at age 30 are not going 29. This is not your highest level of income.
We'll find out.
But, there's another level. My comment is, going back to that question of what is wealth, like part of your idea of wealth is being able to host people. And the idea of hospitality is an incredible value. And so your income allowing you to be able to host is something that you wanted for now and for afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
It brings up another thought I have, which is a lot of people who take the course feel limited in their income growth. And, I've seen you in the last 5 years, your income has increased. And I think that's a critical aspect of financial independence, like not taking your status quo as the thing that you're going to keep on doing.
Yeah, I think financial freedom certainly opened my eyes to thinking about sort of both of the levers that you have, right? You have this lever to sort of live more frugally or cut expenses, cut costs, right? And then you have this lever to bring in more income. And for most people, it's probably some combination of both that you would want to do to reach, the goals or timeline that you want to be on. And so, yeah, shortly after I took financial freedom, I took on a couple of freelancing clients outside of my 9 to 5. That was a great additional income stream. I sort of set up a system, speaking of systems, where that money, anything I made from that went into an account that I call my fun fund. so that when I was like, up early in the morning or after my day job doing this extra work, that money was specifically for travel, was for these other things, so that my main income could be reserved for, day-to-day living expenses and savings and all of that. So yeah, I mean, that was a great eye opener. It was also sort of a test for me to see if I wanted to pursue like freelancing as more of a full-time or part-time kind of partial financial independence type of thing. And the answer was that I did not. So that was a successful experiment and that I don't think full-time freelancing is for me, but it was really helpful. To just like start being more creative about ways I could supplement or increase my income.
It occurs to me that that's a super great system. Like it is a spin-off of the budgeting lesson, which is about wants, needs, and bullshit, right? Like you are able to use your main income to supply all your needs, including your savings, and then you had your freelancing income to have a budget for wants. So that's a really creative way to do it.
Yeah, I think it was a good sort of talk about motivation and discipline. I didn't necessarily always want to be like working on a Saturday morning on like my other job, that like wasn't always the most fun, but I was much more willing to do it when I was like, oh, this directly goes to, flights to go visit a friend who lives in another state, right? Like I can directly make that line. So that was a really good motivator.
So 5 years in, or 4 years in now, since you took FF1 in 2020, 4 years in, tell me like, how have the systems worked? Have they broken in any places? Have your attitudes and behaviors changed about money?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things have worked really well and continue to work. I mean, I was in the midst of paying off the student loans when I took FF1, that I've fully paid those off now. I've got a clear sort of investment strategy. I've got my auto depositing set up. I've increased my income both through like my main work as well as some sort of various freelancing outside of work. Yeah, so I think that's been really good. I feel like I've also sort of applied this kind of thinking to more specific areas of my life. Maybe kind of a funny example is my like wardrobe. So last year I made an inventory of all the clothing that I own in an effort to figure out like which areas were clothes that I actually might need to buy that like fill a gap. Like I don't have any, black pants, something like that, versus like just being at Target and like buying the shirt that's on display. So that was like another example of just sort of setting up a system so that I have a clear kind of like way to make decisions. That is, I'm only going to buy a clothing item that I don't already have something in that category. Which I think is kind of, it's sort of a similar mindset to me of just thinking more intentionally about what are you going to prioritize? What's your system? How do you make decisions about things? So I feel like that mindset has maybe kind of rubbed off into a few other spots in my life too.
Total aside, do you know about one bagging?
No. What's that?
I hesitate to go down this route, but
okay.
one bagging is this idea in the digital nomad community that you should have clothes that are so multi-purpose that you can use them for all uses during the day. So like, a pair of pants that you can go hiking in, like, in the jungle, and then come home. And then when you get an invite to the ambassador's office or the ambassador's palace for dinner, you can wear those pants too. So, and then like, it's also, it's technical wear. So like they're easy to clean, like they don't stain, they don't carry odor.
Don't wrinkle. Yep.
They dry super fast, but one bag clothing is something you can dive into. So, okay, other places that have your attitudes and your habits changed in these last 4 years?
Yeah, I think some of my habits, have come from the sort of just reducing decision fatigue. So just kind of setting up the main systems, as we've already talked about many times, automating savings, et cetera. But also just setting up a couple of other kind of like decision-making things for myself. I feel like with budgeting, one of my top kind of internal battles is that I love to get coffee out. If I'm like out in the world and I can buy a $7 latte somewhere, like I don't know what to tell you. For some people, that's not the thing, but I love it. And I would spend a lot of time like arguing with myself over like, Rachel, you already got one of these this week. We don't need another one this week. Like, but I'm like kind of tired and it's the afternoon and I have to do all this stuff. And should I get a coffee? And like, that was not a worthwhile use of my time and energy. So I set a rule for myself that if I am not at home and I want a coffee, I just buy the coffee. Like that's the rule. I don't worry about it. I don't think about it. And all of that time that I used to spend like spinning on that useless issue that has no impact on my long-term financial plans, I can now spend on like making sure I'm comparison shopping for a larger purchase or making sure I meal prep that week instead of ordering takeout, like these things that like have more of an impact. So there's a couple places where I've done that, where I've just like made a couple decisions of like, in this situation, I always do this and it's like a low budget impact and it's just easier. And that's been really, really helpful for me.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's both tactics and a strategy, right? Like you're just saying, all right, I am just going to buy coffee whenever. That's like a tactic you're allowing yourself, but it's part of this larger strategy that I can actually pay attention to the big, most impactful issues as opposed to the smaller ones. I don't know what your money script is, but I'm someone who has money vigilance. So every financial purchase, there's a tiny rub. There's just like emotional energy that I have to pay attention to with every single purchase. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I feel like I have kind of a mix of the money scripts that you talk about at the beginning of the financial freedom course. But yeah, I think I certainly have some of the money vigilance as well. And I feel like it particularly kicks in for things that there's societal messaging about, like these things are frivolous. And then I'm like, ooh, like, are people going to judge me basically if they see me with my second or third like latte of the week? Like I think it's tied into that, which is stupid. Like no one cares, and I shouldn't waste my time thinking about it.
One of the things they say is there is no good or bad, only consequences. And quite frankly, your third latte of the week is inconsequential, right? But there are emotional and what society puts judgments on these things, right? Like the avocado toast or whatever. Actually, it doesn't have as big of an impact on your finances as your choice of career.
Yeah, exactly.
Curious, so you're talking about the judgment of others. This is not about your latte, but something much larger, which is, well, we'll start with your partner. Where's your partner in terms of all of this?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm certainly more interested in personal finance, or I've sort of like dived into it more. But I think to tie it back to what we were just talking about, another sort of little system system tactic that we've come up with between the two of us is about sort of our joint purchases. And so we live together so that, we buy a lot of, food or like stuff for our apartment, together, and we're pretty collaborative on our shared finances. And so we typically consult each other on like everything that we're going to buy or spend our shared money on. But at some point a couple of years ago, I sort of had this realization that consulting each other on every single like small purchase really wasn't a good use of time and was sort of causing decision fatigue. So we sort of decided that if either of us is considering buying something for the apartment and it's like less than $20, we should just buy it. We should, it's like, I think we need a new vegetable peeler. Like ours is getting kind of dull. Like, do you think we should, like, if you have that thought, you should just buy the vegetable peeler and we'll just, it's $8. We'll like survive. So I think that was another, it's like a tiny thing, but that happens, several times a month. You're like buying something or like, is that another like phone call, or do we make the trip to the store together or like whatever? And so I think that's another case where we've sort of like both adopted this mindset of we'll set this level of what matters to consult each other on. Like, should we move to a different apartment or not? Or should we, figure out different car insurance, right? These like bigger things that affect your life more. It's much more important to reserve energy for those. So I feel like we're pretty aligned on that.
My question is your partner interested in financial independence before 65, and it doesn't matter to you if they care or not?
I mean, I would say not particularly. And, and that's okay with me. Like, yeah, I think we're both pretty content to be on our different tracks. I feel like I'm a less sort of a routine oriented person. And so I am much more open to this idea of I may work for several years and maybe at some point I'll like take a year or two and like really dive into a passion project and then go back to work, or work part-time doing something and work part-time on my own venture, or like I'm very open to all of those ideas. And that's, my partner is much more of a sort of routine oriented person and kind of prefers a more standard schedule. And so, yeah, I think we're like, that's fine.
Right. That you're more frugal than you need to be then. Huh. Amazing. I hear constantly in the course that people are like, I want to do this, but my spouse is not on board. And it's impossible not. Well, there's two issues. One, it's impossible to actually do the finances without this other person being on board because they want to spend more money or they have other priorities. And then the second thing is they don't want to actually hit like quote retire if the other person's going to continue working, right? Like we can't go to Spain or we can't spend the year teaching English in Thailand or whatever. And so without the other person having a joint goal that actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably helps that my sort of vision of financial freedom doesn't include a lot of like long-term travel. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to travel a decent amount so far in my life, and that's great. And I really just prefer traveling for like a couple weeks or maybe max a month at a time, and then I want to be home. And so I think that alone probably, I'm not planning a lot of digital nomad type of life. I could certainly travel for a few weeks by myself, whenever, and I think that probably helps with alignment quite a bit.
How about your friends? Do you talk about finances with your friends or family?
A little bit. I actually had one friend who ended up taking the financial freedom course after we talked about it. Someone else who had gone to Starting Block. So that was kind of a fun connection. But yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot. In general, I feel like as women, and a lot of my friends also identify as women, like it's not super normalized to talk about money, or that's not a topic that we talked about with each other, 10 years ago in our friendship. So it's sort of, it's just not something in the like common conversation topics list. So yeah, that's been kind of interesting. I would say it doesn't come up a lot with many friends, but certainly friends who've also taken financial freedom. Yeah, it's a great like thing to talk about.
Okay, so you don't have friends that like want to pressure you to like, hey, spend more money on this thing.
Yeah, I would say in general, I feel like my friend groups are pretty aligned on like spending at the same level or like going to the same types of restaurants or whatever, doing the same like types of activities or like going for a bike ride instead of going to a expensive exercise class or whatever. I think the people I've just tend to have in my life, I think tend more towards those types of things.
Okay. It's funny because Rachel, you've chosen, I don't know, this is literally true, but probably the unsexiest lesson in financial freedom. Who wants to talk about this? I'm just curious, like, why are you able to do this when so many, and just like in terms of like personal finance and actually making a plan and talking about this, why do you think you're able to do this and most of your friends aren't?
That's a good question. I would honestly say that a lot of my kind of original interest in financial freedom came from a place of a lot of fear and anxiety. So I think that was kind of some of the initial motivation. Around the time I had gone to Starting Block and met you, I was just wrapping up grad school and I had a lot of conflicted feelings, still have a lot of conflicted feelings about the amount of loans I took out for grad school and whether that was sort of a worthwhile way to spend my money and time. And so that loan, I woke up every day thinking about that loan amount. And like, it was a student loan. Like it was fine. Any rational person would have been like, this is fine. And I was like, okay, like every extra cent that I have is going to these loans. Like I paid my loans off in like 3 years. Like that's insane. I like maybe with like a different money script in my mind, like would have done something different there. Like I refinanced them to a lower interest rate. I still paid them aggressively, like all this stuff. And so I think that was the initial motivation. So I think a lot of people maybe don't get themselves into this like fear hole to start from. So maybe that's that. But yeah, I think I got really interested in this idea of having choices, having options, and having money as sort of this lever to not necessarily like just retire. I would say that's not even like my main vision. My main vision is more so, if I'm like working at a place and it turns out that I like don't believe in the mission of, what the company's doing, or I think they're doing something unethical, or I'm working with people I don't like, I just want to be able to quit and do something else. So I think my view of, or if I, if the friend's working on a cool project and they want me to help, like I would love to be able to drop stuff and do that. So I think my vision of financial freedom is much more about that than it is about, just like fully stopping working at 45. And I think that is unlikely to be the path that I'm on. I think it will much more likely be a bit more divided. And so I think I started from that fear place, and then I sort of started learning about it, sort of thinking about all those different options. And those were really appealing to me. And that just really appealed to me, just my personality, I guess. So I think the combination of those two things is what really got me hooked.
So I love that, Rachel. I mean, speaking of beach volleyball and stand-up comedy, the big thing that I've realized in my life is, how do I put this? Like, after I crossed over into financial independence, things have happened to me that I would have never guessed. Because, like, when I was working, all my energy and focus for the majority of my waking life was at work, right? And then when you actually have the independence to do what you want, things will open up in ways, or things will open up that you've never expected before. Like, my life 10 years after financial freedom is so unimaginable to the person I was before. The way I would put it is that I've been able to be faithful to my curiosity. And I think you're a curious person, right? You're a curious person. And when you hit financial independence, you're going to be able to pursue your curiosity to where it leads you. And then equally great, when you're no longer curious, you can just stop.
Yeah, exactly. You're not stuck doing something because you're sort of financially tied to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you're going to just become, a pro beach volleyball player, or, a Netflix stand-up comedian, but you can go as far as you want with it. And other things will.
Yeah. I mean, just having the time and space to, spend time doing things that I want, or like you said, sort of individual curiosities. If a friend ever came to me and said, "Hey, I have this startup idea and I'm working on it, and could you help me out?" Like, oh my gosh, yes, that sounds amazing. Like, I would love to do that. You know what I mean? So just having space to be able to unequivocally say yes to stuff like that when it comes up. I think that's kind of my vision.
Yeah. And all of it will be a consequence of, quite frankly, your systems. So any tips you have for people who want to create systems?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, this is sort of a mantra that I use in many areas of my life as a recovering perfectionist, but like, done is better than perfect. So having a system is better than having no system when if you're spending all this time trying to have a perfect system such that you're just never getting to any system, that's worse than just like a, mediocre system. You know what I mean? So, like when I set up my investment account, I had to like spend a little bit of time like figuring out like, oh, I think I actually want to like have the money go here instead of here, but like just setting it up and like getting it rolling was the much more important step. So I would say give that advice for anyone doing almost anything in life. But I think done is better than perfect. Setting up something is better than being sort of in analysis paralysis.
I love that. I would even just modify it to like, starting is better than perfection, because like anything you can modify, right? Like, you set up your investment account. As soon as you set up your investment account and money starts going, you can change your mind how you invest. That is a lot easier to do after you've set up your investment account than like changing your mind constantly before you've done anything. Same with starting this podcast, Rachel, right? Like, my first few episodes, I didn't know what I was doing. But you learn by going down the path. And maybe that's just a great analogy for personal finance. Right? Like, people are super afraid, like, I'm not going to get it right, so I won't do it. But if you just start saving and investing, you'll learn a lot more about how to do it as you do it. And quite frankly, through your mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all learn best by doing. And especially, I think we learn the most by doing things that we feel resistant to doing, or that feel a little scary or uncomfortable. I feel like the like kind of step a little bit outside your comfort zone is the place where I feel like at least I learn the most.
How did you step outside of your perfectionism?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was just having some structure and accountability. This probably won't surprise you based on everything we've just talked about, but I respond really well to structure. So when there's like a class and an assignment that I feel like I have to do, like, that is great motivation for me to do almost anything, fitness, personal finance, whatever. Even like creative things, or beach volleyball. I've been taking classes, right? Like, to like actually learn the skills, and like I wouldn't do it if it were just like show up to a random beach and try to figure it out. So yeah, I think for me, just knowing that about myself, that I do really well with structure, that sort of like group accountability thing is really useful for me. Yeah, I think those are the biggest things for me, to just sort of like try something.
I mean, quite frankly, that is the whole point of the Financial Freedom 1 class, right? Like it is actually the accountability. And that's the reason why it's 2 months, right? Like you got to do it in 2 months. It's not like you buy this thing and you can do it sometime in the next year or 5. You have to do it now. And that was the point of it. So we're ending our time here. What would be your pitch for anyone to take Financial Freedom 1?
Yeah, I think for me, what I would say to someone thinking about taking Financial Freedom 1 is that it gave me a really strong why. I think I hear a lot of people talking about budgeting or talking about saving for a specific big purchase, but the narrative that I most commonly hear is just how to save a little money on this one thing, or how to get a good deal in this one situation. And I guess I really believe the saying that your calendar and your spending show what you really value. And I think for me, FF1 was taking a really hard look in the mirror at that, at what am I saying I want my values to be? What is my calendar and my spending saying they are now? And how do I change my behaviors and systems to make sort of time and money choices that match these values that I claim to prioritize? So I think just, bringing my day-to-day reality into alignment with what I'm saying that I want.
Beautiful. All right, we're going to end with one question and one request. Question, since you have started taking beach volleyball classes, have you actually gone and done beach volleyball outside of the classes yet?
I have not done it outside of the classes yet, no. But I am excited to. I recently kind of figured out serving. That's been something I couldn't really figure out how to do. But I feel like I figured out how to serve, so that I may be able to actually kind of function in a game now.
Can we set a timeline or a commitment to actually play beach volleyball outside of class?
I love that. Yes. It's my 30th birthday at the end of this month. So there's been a few things I've been sort of trying to do around that. So yeah, maybe by end of this month, I should play at least one game outside of class.
And maybe, talk about community and accountability. Maybe you can actually get one of your classmates in class to go with you. And that'll just be so much easier and safer than showing up for the first time to play beach volleyball by yourself.
True. Very true.
Okay. So, all right. I am actually going to check in with you at the end of the month to make sure you play beach volleyball.
Amazing. Okay. Deal.
All right. And then final thing, a request. Give us your best stand-up joke.
Oh, man. Okay. I have one that's a little bit personal finance related. So maybe we'll go with that. So I'm a renter. I've been saving up my money, and my partner and I pooled our savings. And I think we finally have enough to put a down payment on an iPad. Yes, thank you. We realized that in LA, we're never going to be able to afford a MacBook.
Oh, even a second one. Very good. All right. Well, thank you. That is the perfect way to end this episode. Rachel, I'm super grateful that you appeared. I'm super grateful that you forced me into podcasting. Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for everything I learned from Financial Freedom 1. So thank you for putting that out into the world.
Yeah. And I will be checking in with you at the end of the month.
Let's do it.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, what does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schoolofinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course, is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your